In a world of increasing global challenges, some nations are choosing to come together to build a more resilient and strategic future. That's exactly what Canada is doing by turning to the European Union to diversify its energy exports. But this decision is about more than just a trade exchange. It raises profound questions about international cooperation, lessons of wisdom, and spiritual principles that can guide our choices in an increasingly uncertain world. Today, we dive into this bold and innovative initiative. Let's explore together what Islam, its teachings about honesty and cooperation, can teach us about overcoming global challenges. Ready to discover how a simple alliance can redefine the future of international relations? 1. The context of the Canadian decision. Canada, a land generous in natural resources, has historically relied on the United States for the majority of its oil exports. The southern neighbor has been a reliable partner, providing Canadian industry with a large and accessible consumer market. However, like a quiet river that seeks to diversify with new tributaries to avoid being suffocated by stagnation, Canada is beginning to look for other horizons. The modern world, with its geopolitical tensions and economic threats, is pushing nations to rethink their trade relations. It is not just a question of trade, but of security and economic sovereignty. Diversifying business partners, just like diversifying an investment portfolio, helps reduce the risks associated with excessive dependencies. Canada, with its abundance of natural resources, is therefore seeking to strengthen its ties with the European Union, an economically strong and politically influential region. Recent discussion between Canadian Trade Minister Mary Ng and European Trade Commissioner Maroš Šefčovič demonstrate this strategic effort. The two figures initiated talks aimed at opening new avenues for the export of Canadian oil to the EU. The objective is clear: to free itself from the constraints imposed by too close proximity to the United States. By exploring new potential markets, while consolidating long-term relations with a partner which, for the moment, seems more stable and far-sighted in its economic approach. For Canada, this approach is not just limited to a simple commercial strategy. It's a bold move in a world where unilateralism could be risky, and reliance on a single actor could prove perilous. The country wants to build solid bridges, not only by strengthening its exports, but also by creating a network of partners on which it can count in the long term. This reflects a proactive vision, in which diversification becomes a protection against unforeseen events and unpredictable fluctuations in the global market. Illustrative story. Imagine a merchant in a small town, a simple and humble man whose goods were prized by a single customer. Every week, he waited for this loyal customer, who came to buy everything he had to offer. But over time, he observed that, although he was loved and respected by his client, the latter was subject to the moods of the market. There were busy days and dry days. This astute and far-sighted merchant quickly understood that basing his entire activity on a single buyer was risky. He then began to expand his clientele, selling his products to others, sometimes in neighboring villages, sometimes to less regular but equally interesting customers. Slowly but surely, he is building a network of new buyers. This diversification was not simply a change in his business habits, but a transformation that brought to his business a stability he had never known. By diversifying his sources of income, he ensured that even if one market fell, others would compensate for this loss. In an uncertain world, how can diversifying trading partners not only help adapt to economic fluctuations, but also strengthen a nation's resilience in the face of geopolitical and environmental challenges? Does Canada's quest for greater autonomy in its trade relations with the EU open the way for other nations who perhaps also seek to free themselves from the shackles of the past to embrace a more balanced future. Chapter 2. Islamic teachings on trade and cooperation. Islam, in all its wisdom, places a premium on how business should be conducted. Trade is not just an exchange of goods, but a means of strengthening human connections, building relationships of trust, and promoting fairness in transactions. In the Islamic world, commerce is a noble activity, where honesty, transparency, and cooperation are fundamental values. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, taught that the honest trader will be with the prophets, the truthful ones, and the martyrs. This word resonates as a profound guide for anyone who wishes to succeed in business while preserving their dignity and faith. Integrity is not just a moral principle, but a powerful lever that can transform the way a business, a community, or even a country thrives. Honesty in business leads to trust, and trust is the basis of strong, lasting partnerships. Islamic teachings emphasize that business transactions should not be exploited to generate unjust profits. On the contrary, the emphasis is placed on respecting commitments, transparency in the prices and quality of goods exchanged, and above all, the fair treatment of trading partners. These values not only create a fair economy, but also establish harmonious and mutually beneficial cooperative relationships. In a world where the temptation to manipulate prices and abuse the trust of others can be strong, Islam reminds every trader that integrity is a force that transcends the simple accumulation of material wealth. Commerce, in this perspective, becomes a means of honoring one's commitments to God, one's fellow human beings, and oneself. An approach based on ethics can only lead to strong partnerships, loyal exchanges, and prosperity that is built on trust. Canada, in seeking to diversify its trading partners, adopts a similar dynamic, seeking to establish cooperative relationships based on transparency and mutual respect. In this context, Islamic wisdom could offer a profound reflection on the importance of trust in international economic relations. The idea is not only to export resources, but to establish solid bridges where cooperation takes place while respecting ethical principles and fairness. Illustrative story. During the time of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, there was a merchant who was renowned for his transparency and integrity. This man wasn't just selling products. He made every transaction an act of faith and respect for others. When customers came to him, they came not only to buy, but also to get advice and assurance on the quality of what they were going to receive. Its market was not only a place of commercial exchange, but a space of trust and loyalty. People knew that no matter what the situation, he would not deceive them. His reputation grew beyond the borders of his city. People came from all over not only for his products, but also for the peace they felt while dealing with him. And what was even more remarkable was that the trust he inspired did not stop at a simple exchange. It forged solid bonds in the community. His business prospered, not because of price manipulation or unfair competition, but because of the transparency and honesty he embodied in every step of his work. This merchant, who acted in accordance with the principles of Islam, embodies the ideal of fair and equitable trade. He showed that prosperity comes not just from material wealth, but from how one interacts with others. His example is a powerful reminder that integrity can be the foundation of success in any business, whether local or international. In an interconnected world, where the globalization of economic exchanges can often test the principles of integrity, how can adherence to the Islamic values of transparency and justice promote business partnerships that are not only ethical, but also truly sustainable? How can these principles, in turn, strengthen economic relations between nations? And in particular, How can they be applied in international partnerships like the one that Canada seeks to develop with the European Union? 3. Energy infrastructure challenges to support export to the EU. Exporting Canadian oil to the European Union represents an ambitious and strategic project, but it requires the construction of major infrastructure to transport the oil across thousands of kilometers. The biggest obstacle to this ambitious initiative is the need to build new pipelines and renovate existing ones, while overcoming numerous technical, environmental, and social challenges. Canada, although having the infrastructure to export oil to its American neighbor, faces geographic and logistical challenges in transporting this oil to the EU. To achieve this goal, it is essential to cross provincial territories, indigenous lands, and face strict environmental regulations. These projects are not only technical challenges, but also challenges of governance, social diplomacy, and respect for ethical principles. Pipelines often pass through sensitive regions, both ecologically and culturally. Indigenous communities who live in these areas have expressed legitimate concerns about the environmental impact of these projects, but also the impact on their lands, customs, and ways of life. Protests broke out in several Canadian provinces, and government authorities had to address these concerns to ease tensions. Governments, businesses, and Indigenous communities must engage in open, respectful, and constructive dialogue to find solutions that balance the country's economic needs with environmental preservation and protection of cultural rights. At the same time, oil companies also face growing pressure from environmental advocates and activists who challenge the need for new pipelines, accusing them of contributing to worsening climate change. In this dynamic, the Canadian government, businesses and communities must play a crucial role to ensure that all interests are taken into account. Energy infrastructure projects like pipelines can no longer be viewed solely from an economic perspective. It is imperative that they consider the long-term consequences on the environment, culture, and society as a whole. Illustrative story. Imagine a small community, made up of two villages separated by a river. For generations, these villages have traded goods. But the river, although a beautiful natural landmark, represents a major barrier to trade. One day, the inhabitants decide to build a bridge to connect the two villages. This bridge will facilitate trade, strengthen relationships, and promote economic prosperity throughout the region. However, some residents are reluctant to build this bridge. They are concerned about the environmental impact of construction, the risk of pollution of the river, and disruption to local wildlife. Others worry about cultural implications, wondering whether the bridge irreversibly alters the natural and spiritual balance of the area. The decision to build the bridge cannot be made without a series of negotiations and compromises. Community leaders, workers, environmentalists, and even members of the two villages must meet, discuss, and find a solution that meets everyone's needs. This process takes time, patience, and mutual understanding. But when the bridge is finally finished, it represents more than just infrastructure. It is the symbol of a united community, having overcome its differences to achieve a common goal. In a world where infrastructure projects are becoming increasingly complex and environmental and cultural issues are becoming increasingly important, how can governments and businesses balance urgent economic needs with the legitimate concerns of local communities and environmental advocates? Can large-scale projects, like those in Canada, be carried out in a way that respects and preserves cultures and ecosystems, while ensuring the country's long-term economic prosperity? 4. The geopolitical implications of energy alignment between Canada and the EU. Canada's energy reorientation towards the European Union is not simply a question of oil exports. It has major geopolitical implications, which could redefine international relations, in particular between the world's major economic powers. Oil, a strategic resource par excellence, is at the heart of these dynamics. As the EU seeks to diversify its energy supplies to reduce its dependence on imports from geopolitically unstable or unreliable countries, Canada is emerging as a key player in this energy reorientation. Indeed, the EU, traditionally dependent on oil and gas imports from countries like Russia and the Middle East, finds itself in a delicate position at a crossroads. Political tensions and fluctuations in supply to these regions have exposed the vulnerabilities of the traditional energy model. Energy alignment between Canada and the EU offers a strategic opportunity for the latter, a stable and reliable alternative to less predictable energy sources, while diversifying its trading partners. For Canada, this opportunity represents much more than just increased energy exports. It allows it to strengthen its role on the global stage as a reliable energy supplier, particularly in a world where concerns related to energy security are increasingly pressing. This rapprochement with the EU could also open doors to other forms of geopolitical cooperation, with tangible advantages for Canada in terms of positioning in global markets. Thus, this new energy alignment is also a declaration of political will, both for Canada and for the European Union. For the EU, it is a move to reduce its reliance on less reliable suppliers while engaging in a partnership that could also bring benefits on other fronts, such as green technology and climate initiatives. For Canada, it is a way to diversify its economic relations and strengthen its place in the international geopolitical arena. Illustrative story. Imagine a village located in a dry region, whose inhabitants depend on a single river for their water supply. Over the years, this river has seen its level drop, particularly during a long period of drought. As the situation became more difficult, the village chief, worried about the future of the community, decided to explore other options. After several months of searching, he discovered another river, more distant, but abundant in water. Rather than continuing to rely on the traditional water source alone, the village chief makes a bold decision: build a canal to carry water from this new river to the village. Although it requires a large investment in terms of resources and labor, the initiative ultimately strengthens the village's resilience to future droughts. The canal becomes a symbol of foresight and diversification. It allows the village to better cope with climatic variations, thus ensuring a constant supply of water. By diversifying its sources of supply, the village not only survives, it strengthens itself and adapts to increasingly unpredictable conditions. It becomes less vulnerable to droughts, and in the long term, the stability and prosperity of the community is preserved. In a world where geopolitical tensions and energy crises are increasing, how can the diversification of energy supply sources, as Canada is doing with the EU, strengthen not only national security, but also regional stability? How could this strategic approach help countries better prepare for future uncertainties, while strengthening their position on the global stage? 5. Lessons of cooperation and resilience for the future. The energy initiative between Canada and the European Union illustrates much more than just commercial collaboration. It highlights the crucial importance of strategic cooperation in the face of global challenges. In a world marked by economic crises, geopolitical tensions, and growing environmental threats, the ability of nations to come together to overcome common obstacles becomes a key factor for resilience and lasting prosperity. This energy partnership between Canada and the EU shows that when countries engage in sincere and thoughtful collaboration, they can create mutually beneficial solutions that strengthen not only their economies, but also their diplomatic relations. Recent history, marked by disruptions in global supply chains and political uncertainties, has revealed the vulnerabilities of nations dependent on a limited number of partners. However, initiatives such as that of Canada and the EU offer a model of cooperation that is based on innovation, flexibility, and respect for shared interests. By building more diverse and strong partnerships, nations can reduce their reliance on less reliable sources and build resilience in the face of global economic fluctuations. This cooperation process is also an example of how countries can inspire each other to find solutions to global problems. By overcoming obstacles together, whether logistical, political, or environmental challenges, nations have the opportunity to build bonds that transcend rivalries and tensions, contributing to a more peaceful and harmonious future. It reminds us that the key to the future lies in unity, in the ability of nations to come together not only to meet their immediate needs, but also to anticipate future challenges. Strategic cooperation, based on trust and innovation, not only addresses global challenges, but also creates an environment conducive to sustainable growth and peace. Illustrative story. Imagine two neighboring farmers who, after several difficult seasons marked by unfavorable climatic conditions, find themselves facing mediocre harvests. Each of them struggles to provide for their family and maintain the viability of their farm. Instead of continuing to fight in isolation, they decide to pool their resources. One of them is an expert in irrigation, while the other has developed weather-resistant cultivation techniques. Together, they exchange know-how, combine their harvests, and use their resources more efficiently. For example, one uses the other's optimized irrigation, while the other applies improved cultivation methods. Their collaboration is not limited to a simple exchange, but becomes a strategic partnership that allows everyone to maximize their performance and overcome adverse climatic conditions. The sharing of knowledge and resources not only allows them to thrive in difficult conditions, but also strengthens their bonds and creates a solid foundation for the future. Their example shows that, even in the face of adverse circumstances, intelligent, well-thought-out collaboration can not only overcome challenges, but also generate new opportunities and pave the way for shared prosperity. In an increasingly interconnected world, where global challenges are becoming more complex, how can nations learn from each other to build a more collaborative and resilient future? What lessons can we learn from the example of Canada and the EU to respond together to global challenges, while ensuring that this cooperation benefits everyone, in a spirit of innovation, fairness, and sustainability? Through the example of Canada and the EU, we have seen that true progress is not only made through competition, but through strategic cooperation and collective innovation. As Islam teaches us the value of integrity and collaboration, each nation, by overcoming its challenges together, can create lasting solutions that benefit all. The future of global cooperation rests on these principles of shared wisdom. So, let's think. In an increasingly connected world, how can we, at our level, participate in this transformation to build a more united and resilient future? There is strength in unity, and together everything becomes possible.